I had already decided to circle back and do another Brazilian film review, and I was looking at a multitude of options before arriving here, because what do you mean there's a Brazilian film starring the Gomez Adams himself, Puerto Rico's finest, Raúl Juliá?
I seek justice? Denied!
Hi, I'm Lady Genevieve. I'm Japanese, and on my channel, I talk about entertainment media. If you are one of the many Brazilians that left nice feedback on my review of Ainda Estou Aqui, thank you. I received a fair few recommendations for other Brazilian films, and then a friend of mine messaged me to ask if I was going to do a review of Kiss of the Spider-Woman, and I asked, what are you talking about? Well, apparently there's a new film adaptation coming out that recently made its premiere at Sundance, but let's rewind a bit so we can have the full picture. The Kiss of the Spider-Woman was originally a 1976 novel, El Beijo de la Mulher Aranha, published by Argentine author Manuel Puig. It was adapted into a stage play that premiered in 1983, and then it was adapted into a 1985 Brazilian film called O Beijo da Mulher Aranha, which went on to be nominated and win some accolades during award show season, including but not limited to wins for the Best Actor Oscar and BAFTA for William Hurt. Then, in 1992, The Kiss of the Spider-Woman premiered a musical adaptation for the stage, with West Side Story's original Anita, Chita Rivera, playing the titular role. The new version, with the recent premiere at Sundance, is a film adaptation of the musical adaptation, and it stars Jennifer Lopez as the titular character. She is also an executive producer of the film, which works out well for me, a person with a lot of nostalgia for The Wedding Planner. That movie is so silly and fun, it has brought me so many laughs over the years.
Because he's nothing. Because I love a challenge. And because I'm a goddamn professional!
This new version also co-stars Mexico's finest, Diego Luna, as one of the lead characters, and it's directed by Bill Condon, who directed other well-received movie musicals, including both Chicago and Dreamgirls. So all of this was reason enough for me to add this new film version to my Letterboxd watch list. Do not forget to follow me on Letterboxd. And although I had originally planned for a different film to be my next Brazilian film review, I figured I might as well do the 1985 film first, particularly since it's more easily accessible on streaming. But before I do that, I wanted to quickly check in with any of the new Brazilian viewers who showed up ready with energy and enthusiasm to my review of Ainda Estou Aqui and might have decided to come back and watch another one of my videos. So if you just want to skip ahead and watch the movie review, this video is timestamped so that will show you where to go. Besides the obvious matter of saying thank you to the many Brazilian viewers who showed up, I did not know that offering citizenship was a thing that Brazilians do when they like your work, but that did happen more than once in the comments of my review, so I suppose it's a Brazilian thing that I was not aware of. I will say that I am open to doing more reviews of Brazilian films, but I don't have a set timeline in mind of when I will do that. I plan my reviews weeks or sometimes even months in advance. I had already decided I would do another Brazilian film review after posting my Ainda Estou Aqui review, and I was being sent so many Brazilian film recommendations, but I found that more than one of the films that I was being recommended were ones that I couldn't easily find access to. For example, 4 Days in September, that one looked very interesting, but it's not available on iTunes. It's not available on streaming platforms that I currently have access to. There is a copy of it uploaded on YouTube, but it doesn't include official subtitles. So if I was going to watch that version, I would have to try to use the automatic Google Translate feature for subtitles, and I don't know how reliable that would be to follow along with an entire feature film. So I thought that I would share this perspective or dilemma with the audience. So if any of you have any recommendations of how to be able to get access to watch more Brazilian films, you can let me know. I'm already on the verge of canceling my VPN because it is not good enough to allow me access to libraries in other countries on streaming platforms. So if any of you use that method, feel free to let me know what works for you so that I can have enough time to start looking into what my options are for if I want to have better access to international films on a long-term basis. But now let's talk about the 1985 film Kiss of the Spider-Woman. Being that the film is from 1985, I'm just going to talk about full spoilers because it's not like it's a new theatrical release where people are still trying to find time to be able to go to the cinema to watch it. It's been 40 years. You've had time to see it unspoiled. So if you would like to go and watch it first and then come back to this review, that's absolutely fine, and that's your choice to do it that way. It's also a story that has had so many different versions and adaptations, and that makes it feel even sillier to tiptoe tiptoe around avoiding plot spoilers in a movie review on YouTube in 2025. Kiss of the Spider-Woman, the 1985 film, focuses on two men who share a prison cell under the Brazilian dictatorship. Within the context of the original story in the source material of being an Argentinian book, this can be assumed to take place under the US-backed Argentinian military dictatorship that began in the mid-1970s, whereas the film adaptation, which was made as a Brazilian film, interestingly enough, was made near the end of the Brazilian dictatorship. That dictatorship is listed as having ended in 1985, and this film was released in 1985, which of course means that all of the development, casting, filming, all of those things would have been done while still under that period of Brazil's dictatorship. After I watched the film, I went and cross-referenced these dates because there were often parts of the story that made me feel as though they weren't as radical as I would have liked to watch for the characters, the overall narrative, and the way that certain themes were being addressed or conveyed. But then once I checked the dates, I couldn't help but speculate that maybe it's entirely possible that the people making this story were approaching things in such a way that they were trying to bury things much deeper beneath the surface of the story out of fear of being retaliated against by this or that dictatorship in whichever country, depending on which version of the story you're accessing. I'll talk through more of the story and how I experienced it in a moment, but I do want to first make a point of establishing that if anyone watching this review is either Brazilian or Argentinian or both, if you have more knowledge of the historical context on this story, please feel free to share that information in the comments, because that wasn't something that was as easy to investigate the things that I wanted to know, because I don't speak Portuguese or Spanish, so I wouldn't have as much access to various discussions or published material that would analyze this story within those particular historical contexts. So let's go through some of this plot and I will share some of my thoughts about the material. The two men whom we meet in this prison cell are Molina and Valentin. Molina is an apolitical gay man and Valentin is a leftist revolutionary political prisoner. So basically my favorite kind of person, especially when you have Raúl Juliá playing him. Molina was played by William Hurt, and he was the one who won an Academy Award and a BAFTA for Best Actor for his role, and a significant portion of the film focuses on his point of view. If stories can have only one protagonist, this story's protagonist is Molina. Molina chooses to help pass the time they spend locked up in this cell by retelling Valentin a story from one of his favorite films. However, it doesn't take long for Valentin to go, "This story you're telling sounds really weird." And through further questioning, Valentin is able to correctly identify that Molina's beloved romantic film is a propaganda film. This so-called love story Molina's very swept up in while he's running purely on vibes is romanticizing evil. And when Valentin is critical of Molina's romanticization of this story, Molina responds by saying, "Look, I don't explain my movies. It just ruins the emotion."
Look, I don't explain my movies. It just ruins the emotion.
And I had a visceral reaction to hearing this discourse that they were having, because more than once I have posted a movie review and had people in the comments complaining to me that I need to keep politics out of movies, out of art, and out of my reviews. That's nothing but pure anti-intellectualism. Now, to be clear, I don't go on long political diatribes in every movie review that I post. Whether or not I discuss some sort of socio-political topic and how much I discuss that in a movie review depends entirely on the art itself, as well as how I experience that art from my perspective and lived experience. But this recurring cutaway to the events in this propaganda film is used as a narrative device to further convey the evolution of the relationship between Molina and Valentin. In both stories, you have characters from very different ideological perspectives developing a relationship with one another. Now, what you eventually learn is that the secret police higher-ups, or more specifically within this ecosystem, the warden of the prison, they're conspiring with Molina to try to get information out of Valentin about his comrades. Typical Fed informant behavior. Listen, the tactics are the same all over the place. You can read all about the FBI sending people in to infiltrate revolutionary groups such as the Black Panthers. So the jailers poison their food so that once Valentin gets sick, Molina is able to take care of him and they're able to grow closer as a result. Then Valentin will feel more comfortable and hopefully open up a bit to him and share something specific that Molina will be able to leak to the PIOUS. The PIOUS, if you didn't already know, is Irish slang for the cops, and I learned that slang from Kneecap, one of my newest hyperfixations.
Loved every moment, the kind of movie that makes you want to punch a cop. Whoa.
I don't have a lot of hyperfixations nowadays, but the closest thing I have to hyperfixations currently are James Cameron's Avatar and Kneecap.
Obviously, we completely encourage people to go out and punch their local cops.
Whoa. Beat the cops asunder.
So once Molina has taken care of Valentin when he got sick, Valentin begins to finally open up. Now, up until that point, I'd been feeling a bit annoyed that we were not able to know more about Valentin because I wasn't a fan of Molina. I wanted to know what Valentin was all about. But once we got to this turning point in the story, I understood that part of the reason why we hadn't learned more about Valentin before then was because he's holding a lot of that information as a secret. Now, I still would have rather we get to learn more about him before that point, as maybe some sort of look into his thoughts and memories, even if he's keeping that information hidden from Molina. But I'm just sharing how I can understand why they were doing things in that way. I'm not going to reshare every bit of plot and information of what is in the story, but I do want to point out one key thing that Valentin reveals that I found to be important to understanding what the film might have been trying to say and how it approaches building the relationship between these two characters. Once Valentin begins to open up, he shares about how, although he has a girlfriend in the movement, his true love is actually a woman named Marta. Marta is upper class, pure bourgeoisie, with all the money, formal education, and freedom that comes with that affluence. Now, her being upper class on its own wouldn't necessarily bother me. Rose from Titanic came from the upper class, and she went, oh, this way of life is trash. But the fact that Marta's response to Valentin being part of the revolution is to tell him that he needs to not be in it anymore, or else they cannot be together, and they never show her changing her mind from that stance. I'm sorry, did you want me to root for them to end up together? Because I don't. He can do better than that. But all that aside, this information of Valentin yearning for love is important because previously Molina had already shared about how much he has yearned for love and failed to find it in real life, of loving someone and being loved in return. The impression I got was that the film was trying to show how maybe they're not so different after all, that ultimately people just want to live happy lives full of love, and how tragic it is when these larger systemic injustices get in the way of that. But ultimately, I didn't find the film's ending to be all that cathartic, though to be fair, I don't necessarily think it was intended to be, because the way that the film ends is that Molina gets released on parole, and Valentin has given him a message to send to his comrades and a phone number of how he can reach them. The night before Molina was set to be released, he had confessed his love to Valentin, who proceeded to physically hook up with him. Molina didn't want to get involved in the political revolutionary ongoings, but he was rather smitten with Valentin, so eventually he relented and agreed to take both the message and phone number. Molina doesn't know that the peelers are following him now that he's been released, so when he tries to go meet up with those comrades, the peelers roll up and they start shooting, and these comrades, well, they don't know Molina, so they don't know if he was conspiring the whole time with the peelers to get them caught at this meetup. So they shoot at Molina, and he dies in the car of the peelers, who had gathered Molina up and said that they would take him to the hospital if only he gave up the phone number, but he refused to give that up, so his body was dumped out of the car, and the peelers concocted a false story about his death and making it seem as if he was involved with those revolutionaries. Meanwhile, Valentin is still stuck in prison, and after a really violent interrogation, a sympathetic doctor gives him morphine to help him sleep, and Valentin seemingly passes away from his wounds and is shown running out of prison and reuniting with Marta in a paradise-like setting. So ultimately what they're showing is that both of these men died as a result of the violent turmoil that ensues under a dictatorship, and their greatest desire was to simply have love. But that being said, I often felt as if the story was either not pushing particularly revolutionary ideology, or it was obfuscating more of its revolutionary sentiments because the book was published and this film adaptation was made during active periods of dictatorship. This is not Ainda Estou Aqui, where you're making a film decades after a dictatorship has happened and you have the gift of hindsight while looking back on it. I don't want to be too harsh in my judgment of this version of Kiss of the Spider-Woman for that reason. There may very well be quite a bit of historical context that I'm not currently aware of. I just happen to prefer art that is more direct in how it depicts the revolutionary struggle. So for Valentin, the fact that his bougie girlfriend didn't approve of him fighting the good fight, the only outcome I would really enjoy would be either, number one, She sees the error of her ways and joins the struggle alongside him. Or number 2, he finds a better love with a fellow comrade. Valentin has a girlfriend, Lydia, and she's in the movement, but he's still hung up on Marta. To that I say, grow up, move on. And then with Molina, I don't necessarily mind him beginning as someone sent to infiltrate and get information. I would be a hypocrite if I refused to be open to that concept within a story. I'm an Avatar fan, and that's exactly what happened with Jake Sully, and then he got Navi-pilled. He saw that Ewa is the way. He became Toruk Makto. It was a whole thing. That movie made billions of dollars, so you've probably seen it and don't need me to re-explain the plot. But for me, Molina's ending falls flat because he didn't stick to his principles and refused to give up the phone number to the peelers because he saw the error of his ways and decided to join the revolutionary struggle. He was only interested in staying loyal to Valentin because he loved him. You don't watch Molina achieve some sort of enlightenment or awakening of reading revolutionary literature and learning from revolutionaries and seeing that he needs to join this fight because it does affect him. It's so much less interesting of an ending for me for that reason. You know how Jake Sully decided to join the Nafi? That's because he spent loads of time with them, learning their way of life, and he saw how vastly superior it was. He got disillusioned because he very quickly realized that he was being one of the bad guys, a disgusting colonial sky person. Ugh. And so he saw the error of his ways and he joined the revolutionary struggle. That was a transformative character arc. But Kiss of the Spider-Woman, it most certainly has its moments. There are these moments of brilliance that I found to be highly compelling and it drew me in. And more or less all of them, unsurprisingly, involved Valentin speaking truths, partially because Raúl Juliá is so unfathomably charismatic as a performer, I cannot look away from him ever, but also the material that he was given. Anytime he had to make a valid point, I was fully dialed in. I was fully engaged. For example, when Valentin was talking about his experience of telling Marta about how he's involved with the revolutionary struggle, and she said that he needed to stop all of that and leave the movement, but Valentin says, but how could I do nothing when my friends were disappearing every day? And that's why, despite the film's insistence on making a melodramatic informant to the peelers the protagonist of this story, when I watch this film, Valentin is the main character. He's my protagonist. He is who I'm invested in. Because by far, the most compelling part of this film is an argument Valentin and Molina have. So here's what happened. Molina is going on and on about that insufferable propaganda film. He's retelling the story as a form of escapism from their circumstances. It's a fantasy for Molina. So Valentin says, fantasies are no escape. And already I love the call out because I understand that there can be a soothing quality to some works of art. I already told the Brazilians on the internet that after I watched Ainda Estou Aqui, I was so distressed that when I came home from the cinema, I needed to go and watch Mamma Mia. But that doesn't mean that that's the way to live your life all the time. Just consuming media that is only good for pacifying oneself. I don't recommend that.
Fantasies are no escape.
So Valentin says, fantasies are no escape. And Molina responds, if you've got the keys to that door, I will gladly follow. Otherwise, I will escape in my own way. Thank you. And ooh, wow, okay, there's a lot to unpack there because on the superficial epidermis layer of this scene, the dialogue is simply talking about how they are trapped in this cell and Valentin does not have the keys to open the cell and let them out. So Molina is going to tell this story as a way to pass the time and make their experience a bit less miserable. But that's not what I'm getting out of this dialogue. What I'm hearing is the larger pattern of what revolutionaries have to deal with. There are so many people who just sit back in a more passive existence. They're not the ones doing the labor and fighting the fight to make real necessary change happen. But once the revolutionaries push those changes into existence, a whole lot of those people will follow in their footsteps and enjoy the benefits of that labor. Anytime people fight to create labor unions or get discriminatory policies pertaining to things like apartheid or segregationism abolished, and so on and so forth, the end of the draft in the US came as a result of massive amounts of anti-war protests. Those are just a few examples of many throughout centuries of history. If we put this in the context of art, though, something more accessible to the people in the audience whose eyes begin to glaze over when I begin to mention something political, this exact narrative concept happens at the end of Glass Onion. When Helen starts tearing up Miles Bronze's extravagant interior inside his glass onion, she's the only one willing to actually take action, and it's only when she really gets going, she's got energy and momentum, and then all of a sudden, the gang Aang wants to join in on the fun. We'll smash some things too, we'll talk a bit of trash, but it's entirely performative because those people don't have real principles to fight that fight. So when she keeps going, they now all of a sudden feel like she's doing too much, she's going too far. They try to stop her.
Come on, Helen.
But once she goes full Hindenburg and destroys the glass onion, now that she did all the work, now they're willing to follow in her footsteps and reap the benefits of her labor and do what they should have done from the very beginning.
If you've got the keys to that door, I will gladly follow. Otherwise, I will escape in my own way. Thank you.
In this one argument, with just a couple of lines of dialogue, Kiss of the Spider-Woman is hitting on so many issues and calling out the practice of using art as a pacifier, of living life passively instead of taking action to force change for the betterment of humanity. And do you know what Valentine says in response to Molina's words? Valentine says to Molina, "Then your life is as trivial as your movies." That is one of the hardest, nastiest reads I've heard in a while, and I'm obsessed with it.
Then your life is as trivial as your movies.
When I think about this film, that will be the conversation I think of, because it's something I happen to think about a lot, and I relate to that conflict and the complexities of that dynamic where art can be so wonderful and therapeutic, but it's also not going to be what liberates you from systemic oppression. So ultimately, despite some of my reservations about the way that this film's messaging is delivered, I mostly really liked it. I will be very interested to see the Jennifer Lopez version because I'm not familiar with this story as a musical. And in the Jennifer Lopez version, Diego Luna, Mexico's finest, he will be playing Valentine. Oh, absolutely. Opening weekend, I'm already there. If you let me reserve my ticket now, I will do it. So if you're Brazilian or Argentinian and you have more insight and context to offer about the Kiss of the Spider-Woman and the source material being created under active dictatorships, I would love to know more about that. So please feel free to share that information in the comments.
Then she asked me to leave the movement. But how could I do nothing when my friends were disappearing every day?